There's been a lot of talk recently about Disney's live-action remakes of their classic animated films. Understandably, some people feel burnt out on them and would prefer to see Disney explore new titles, while others aren't so bothered. There have been a number of comments by a number of people on the topic, but one thread in particular by Travis McElroy caught my attention. In it, he defends the remakes and takes umbrage with those who have expressed their frustration with them. He points out that while they are adaptations of previous works, the original animated films were as well, and argues that these remakes are targeted mostly at an audience of children who are unfamiliar with the animated films, and therefore don't recognize the derivative nature of the remakes. And he's not entirely wrong to say that. The original films were adaptations of previous works. They aren't entirely original works of fiction. Nothing is. Some had even appeared in film adaptations before Disney's. But I don't think this is a particularly strong defense. The approach to adaptation Disney's remakes take is entirely different from that of the original animated films, and the argument that the films are targeted toward children and therefore shouldn't be criticized for their derivative nature is more than a little misguided. While I don't really think it's an opinion that's worth taking him to task over, Travis is far from the first person to echo sentiments like these, so I think it's worth examining why exactly this argument is flawed. As Travis points out, many of Disney's animated films are well known for being adaptations of earlier stories. Like all adaptations, and in fact all works of fiction, Disney's films are all to some extent derivative. The word derivative has a pretty negative connotation, but it isn't necessarily a bad thing for a work of art to be similar to a previous work if it uses the shared ideas in a new way. All stories reuse themes, character archetypes, plot structures, and other ideas from earlier stories. Original works of fiction use these shared ideas to create new and unique works of art. Any film adaptation of a book or graphic novel is inherently derivative of its source material, but in adapting to film, the filmmaker creates a new experience. A remake of an older film using technology that was unavailable at the time of the original's release can enable a filmmaker to present the story in a more visually impressive way. And a reinterpretation of a film that was itself a reinterpretation of another work can be worthwhile, if it offers an experience that significantly differs from the original film. You're unlikely to find someone disappointed that HBO and the BBC are creating a new series based on His Dark Materials, given the disappointment that was the film adaptation. So, why does it bother people when Disney makes a new adaptation of a work they've already adapted? Disney's 1992 animated film Aladdin is based on a story from 1001 Nights, a compilation of Arabic stories told from the perspective of Scheherazade, the wife of a sultan who must tell a new story each night or be killed. Aladdin is probably the best known and most popular story from this collection, at least among Western audiences, which is somewhat ironic given it was never originally a part of it. Aladdin was first published in a French translation by Antoine Galland in the early 1700s, after he began to run out of other stories to translate. By Galland's account, the story was recounted to him first by a Syrian traveler named Hana Diab. It has since been referenced in countless works of fiction and had numerous adaptations. It's been released in other collections of literature, performed on stage and in streets, and put to film on several occasions. In the original version of the story, set in the capital of one of China's vast and wealthy kingdoms, Aladdin is a young boy.
Yeah. Wow. I'm only 33.
He's generally lazy and irresponsible and wastes his time playing games with local children instead of trying to find work, and his mother struggles to pay to feed them. She says of him, "Aladdin is lazy. His father did all he could to teach him his trade and got nowhere. Since he died, despite all my efforts, my son's only occupation has been to roam the streets. I despair of what he will become." When Aladdin is 15, he is approached by a magician from northern Africa, who convinces Aladdin and his mother that he is a long-lost brother of Aladdin's late father. He spends a bit of time plying them with trinkets, tells Aladdin to get a job, and eventually convinces Aladdin to leave the city with him. The magician then leads Aladdin to a cave and instructs him to retrieve a lamp hidden within. He then gives Aladdin a ring to keep him safe. In the cave, Aladdin grabs the lamp as well as a number of precious gems. He returns to the magician, who demands that Aladdin give him the lamp before helping him get out. Aladdin refuses, and in a fit of rage, the magician traps him inside. Aladdin spends several days there, and is only saved by accidentally rubbing the magician's ring to reveal a genie inside. He then escapes and returns home to his mother, and shortly afterward, while cleaning the lamp to sell it for food, they discover a second, more powerful genie hidden inside. Though Aladdin's mother is initially apprehensive of the genie, calling it a demon, she and Aladdin live off of food and silver from this genie for several years, until one day Aladdin encounters the Sultan's daughter on her way to a bathhouse. He is instantly enamored with her, and demands that his mother present the jewels that he collected from the cave to the Sultan, in exchange for the princess's hand in marriage. The Sultan is initially impressed, but his vizier, who wishes for his son to marry the princess, asks the Sultan for the chance to find a better gift than Aladdin is given. He does so, and the princess is engaged to the vizier's son. Aladdin, upon discovering this, orders the genie to take the princess to him for several nights in a row, and forces the vizier's son to spend these nights in an outhouse. It's a pretty traumatic experience for both of them, and eventually the wedding is called off. Aladdin's mother then approaches the Sultan again to ask that Aladdin be allowed to marry his daughter. The Sultan, with advice from the vizier, sets an incredibly high price, and Aladdin meets and exceeds it with the help of the genie, parading his wealth through the city and to the palace. He convinces the Sultan to let him marry the princess, and overnight he builds a palace more magnificent than any other in the world. The magician, hearing of this, travels back to Aladdin's city and tricks the princess into exchanging the magic lamp for a new one, then uses the genie to teleport the princess, all the servants, and the palace back to his home in northern Africa. The Sultan, enraged at the disappearance of his daughter, demands that Aladdin be executed, but Aladdin is saved by citizens who threaten to storm the execution. Aladdin vows to find the princess, and uses the genie of the ring to teleport to the palace, where he helps the princess kill the magician, retrieves the lamp, and travels back home. In the final act, the magician's younger brother kills a holy woman and takes up her identity as a disguise in an attempt to kill Aladdin. The genie tells Aladdin of the imposter's intentions, and Aladdin kills him, ending the story. It goes without saying that in adapting the story to film, Disney changed a great deal. The film now takes place in the fictional nation of Agrabah. Aladdin is now an orphan, and instead of being a cruel, stubborn, and rebellious child, the Disney film turns Aladdin into a classic thief with a heart of gold, a diamond in the rough. The princess, now named Jasmine, is a far more active character in the story, and unlike the original, has no interest in marrying into wealth. Her meeting with Aladdin is also far less voyeuristic. Instead of meeting as she's going to bathe, Aladdin meets her when she sneaks away from the palace. The Genie of the Ring is no longer present, and unlike the original version of the Genie of the Lamp, who is a willing servant that Aladdin's mother initially refers to as a demon, the animated film's genie is immediately befriended by Aladdin and longs to be free. The film also borrows elements from an earlier adaptation titled The Thief of Baghdad. The magician, his brother, the vizier, and the vizier's son are all merged into one character, now named Jafar, and a 3 wishes rule and some other restrictions on the genie's power are instituted. Several new characters like Iago, the magic carpet, and Aladdin's animal sidekick Abu are introduced, and plot elements are shifted, changed, or deleted. The time frame of the film is massively condensed, and the conflict between Aladdin and Jafar is resolved in an entirely different way. And there are a number of other major and minor changes Disney's Aladdin makes in adapting its source material, not least of which is the presentation of the work in an entirely separate medium. By contrast, the remake alters significantly less. Performances and presentation are different, and certain scenes are rearranged, Jafar now has a history as a thief, and there's a new subplot focusing on his desire to invade Jasmine's mother's homeland that doesn't really go anywhere. Jasmine now expresses more interests in matters of state and desires to be Sultan herself, and she's even given a new song that expresses that desire. The captain of the guard, now named Hakim, is more sympathetic and has a slightly larger role. A new character is introduced in the form of Jasmine's handmaiden Dahlia, whose main purpose is to serve as the genie's love interest. And of course, the film is now in live action. These changes aren't completely insignificant or anything. There's new performances, new lines, new scenes, and new songs. Will Smith's genie is pretty fun. Jafar is less of an intimidating character now and feels more sneaky and conniving, and Aladdin is a lot more socially awkward. But he's still the thief with the heart of gold, the diamond in the rough. He still has a pet monkey. Jafar is still Jafar. Will Smith's jokey pop culture referencing genie is still a jokey pop culture referencing genie. It's not completely accurate to say, like Travis does, that these remakes are new adaptations of the old folktales. Rather, they're adaptations of the animated films. In fairness, they don't really pretend to be anything else. The credits for Aladdin explicitly state that it's based on Disney's Aladdin. And that's sort of the crux of the problem. The animated films from the so-called Disney Renaissance are all adaptations of earlier stories, but in adaptation, they depart radically from their source material. They adapt old works into a new medium. While some of these stories had appeared on film before, not all of them had, and most had not been presented through animation. All of these films change the structure of the narratives. All of them take great liberties in their portrayal of characters, and there are many more changes each individual film makes in adaptation. All of these alter the context of these films in massive ways to present them to an entirely different audience than that of the original stories. By comparison, the remakes offer far less in the way of new material. They're obviously not all simple remakes. The Maleficent films provide an entirely new narrative, and the upcoming live-action Mulan forgoes some features of the animated version and steers closer to Chinese wuxia films. The others all have some amount of new plot threads and are obviously not completely bereft of new material, but for the most part, they err on the side of caution. They're live-action now. Well, The Lion King isn't, but they're not bringing these stories to a new medium. They're still mostly musicals and still use the same musical numbers with some additions. Their takes on characters, while they have some differences, much more closely resemble their animated counterparts than the animated versions resemble the original stories. And much of the added material is superficial and does little to actually improve the films. When a film is remade, the remake is quite reasonably expected to attempt to improve upon the original in some way. The general consensus, though, seems to suggest that Disney haven't succeeded. They've tried. Quite a few of the liberties they've taken seem designed to address concerns with the continuity or internal logic of the animated films. But Beauty and the Beast doesn't become a more compelling narrative because the film explicitly tells us why the townsfolk are unaware of the beast. Aladdin doesn't really have much higher stakes now that Jafar intends to use his newfound powers to invade another country. And as much as The Lion King's marketing has hyped up its admittedly incredible special effects, all of these remakes are far less visually interesting than their animated counterparts. They never stood a chance. Live action is, by its nature, constrained by the audience's expectation of verisimilitude. We want live-action films to look like things that can really happen in the real world, and there are a number of things that can never be possible for a live performer. The advantage of animation is that it doesn't suffer these constraints. Animation allows the audience to ignore the rules of reality and allows for the presentation of things that could simply never occur in real life. It enables filmmakers to create visuals that can't possibly be recreated in the real world. It lets them make a movie about talking, singing lions with emotionally expressive body language. Any attempt to recreate animated visuals in live action will generally result in an experience that has far less potential to impress. No matter how realistic The Lion King looks, its inability to create expressive characters as a result of its strict adherence to realism will always make it worse to look at than the original. It makes the entire concept of live-action remakes look like it was a misguided venture from the start. But maybe it doesn't matter if these films are actually any better than their animated predecessors. Maybe they don't need to improve anything in order to justify their existence. Maybe, like Travis says, it's enough that modern audiences who are unfamiliar with these stories can be introduced to them for the first time. Well, not really. When they first released, Disney's Renaissance animated films were adapting stories from potentially thousands of years earlier, or from entirely separate cultures. They weren't perfect.
They're not like you and me, which means they must be evil.
But they were new experiences, recontextualized for a new audience. Today, though, the Disney brand is inescapable, and the animated films are an inextricable part of our culture. You're unlikely to find a single person who is unfamiliar with any of the stories told in Disney's Renaissance films. And Disney knows this. It's the entire reason they have elected to remake these films instead of adapting other stories. It's inaccurate to say that they're meant for children who haven't experienced the older films because their success is so reliant on cultural nostalgia toward them. That, plus the fact that the animated films remain extremely accessible to this day and are still watched by today's children. And the argument that these films are just for kids is a little condescending. The animated films were never solely meant for children. Children have no purchasing power whatsoever. They don't have money, and they don't have jobs, and because parents don't much like leaving their children unattended in crowded theaters, there will always be adults in the audience of any film. And Disney has always accounted for this. From their humor to their drama, they have always included elements in their movies meant for mature audiences. In a 1995 interview with Entertainment Weekly that has gone down as one of the more pointedly tone-deaf moments of the Disney Renaissance, Glenn Keane said of Pocahontas, "We're doing a mature love story here, and we've got to draw her as such. She has to be sexy." They didn't do this just for all the kids out there. Just as Genie doesn't do an impression of William F. Buckley Jr. for children.
I see what you mean.
And Claude Frollo's persecution of Romani to serve his lust for Esmeralda isn't exactly a childish topic either. Even if they were films solely meant for kids, that hardly negates any of the criticisms toward them. Children's media is just as deserving of critical discussion as media for adults, and kids are just as deserving of creativity and imagination in their stories as adults are. Disregarding criticisms of a movie on the basis that children are the only people meant to care about it just encourages lazy approaches to filmmaking that have led to the release of countless terrible animated movies. If audiences are fine with mediocre kids' films, studios are less motivated to make the next Inside Out, and can instead get away with the next Minions. Or maybe the next Trolls. Travis, is this your goal? Obviously, the Disney remakes haven't been quite so awful. But because there are just so many of these coming out all the time, it's gotten to the point that for many, their constant presence is beyond tiresome, irrespective of their actual quality. This summer alone, there have been 3 live-action remakes of Disney films, and a sequel to Maleficent is coming this fall, along with the remake of Lady and the Tramp scheduled to release on Disney Plus in November. They've quickly become unavoidable, and they're just one part of a problem that has steadily been getting worse with each passing year. In making these films, Disney actively prioritizes their development over anything new. Every year, Disney pushes out a dozen or so movies, and almost all of them are tentpole franchise releases, based on established intellectual properties. Ignoring their live-action remakes, there have been 3 films in the MCU this year. There was a new Toy Story. There's a new Star Wars film coming in December. Frozen 2 is coming this fall. Disney currently has a greater share of the entertainment industry than anyone else. After the Fox merger, they now own the rights to 8 of the top 10 highest-grossing films of all time. Endgame just knocked Avatar off its throne as number 1. Given all this, is it so unreasonable to want them to do something new? They can certainly afford to take the risks associated with a new property. They've got more money than God, but they seem content to spend it on the same things over and over again. Obviously, none of my opinions, or the opinions of anyone else, about these films are in any way an objective or universal truth. You're free to disagree with criticism and to enjoy movies for what they are, but to dismiss said criticism outright is more than a little close-minded. No multi-billion-dollar company needs anyone defending their actions. Companies like Disney will always be deserving of scrutiny, because they have immeasurable influence over every facet of pop culture. So, while we wait for Disney to run out of properties to remake before they're forced to make something new, I think it's fair if people want to whine a little. I mean, it's what I've been doing for the last 20 minutes.